Well, Ecclesia, if you have joined us this summer, you know that we are kicking off a series last week on women in the Bible. And last week, Pastor Chris talked about Hagar. And in his sermon, he talked about the importance of naming things and naming people. And what you need to know about Hagar, and if you were here last week, you already know this, is that she was the first character in the Bible to name God. And she came up with the name Elroy for God. And the name Elroy stands for the God who sees me. And for Hagar, that was really significant because her entire life she had been enslaved and she felt like she lived in a world that did not value her and did not see her. But God called her by name and understood her and saw her. And so that name is significant. And in the spirit of names mattering, I have a mother named Deborah. And she had a very unbiased request for me that perhaps we should do the sermon today on the prophet Deborah. And immediately I said no. But then I got learning about Deborah. And you guys, she's kind of awesome. I don't know if you know the character of Deborah well in the Bible, but she is a prophet or a prophetess, a judge. She's known as the mother of Israel. And in the story we're going to read about today, she's actually a military commander. In many ways, one of the things I don't love about the character of Deborah in the Bible is that in some ways she seems unrelatable. Like she's a judge, a military commander, mother of Israel, a prophet. And the Bible has nothing bad to say about her. Unlike most characters in the Bible that mess up and wrestle with their humanity and make big public mistakes, Deborah seemed to execute her missions rather flawlessly. Part of me wonders, as the only female judge in the Bible, and perhaps a rarity in that time as a female judge, I wonder if Deborah gave herself permission to ever mess up or to show her flaws. Perhaps Deborah felt that she had to be perfect. My own mother, Deborah, who is here today, many of you know her. She was served on the board here for a while. And when God made my mom, Deborah, he poured a little bit too much serotonin and dopamine into her brain. And I grew up thinking that I was just like maybe a sad kid. And I now know that I was the normal one. I have one picture of my mom. It happens to be here in this room. This is at one of our big fundraisers that I used to co-host for our charity, Project 88. And what I want you to know about this photo is my mom did not win that game. She also does not drink caffeine. So that's all you need to know about the Deborah I know well. But today is about Deborah in the Bible. And so we're going to read a lot of Bible today. If you've listened to one of my sermons before, I tend to have kind of Bible-heavy sermons because I have this theory that the Bible always preaches better than me. So we're going to kick it off in Judges 4. Now, really, Judges 4 and Judges 5 is both on the character of Deborah. Judges 5 is called the Song of Deborah, and it's more of a poetic account. We're going to read the narrative account of her life and her story. So this begins, the people of Israel cried out to the Eternal again for help. Since Sisera had 900 iron chariots, he prevailed against and oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. So basically, this leader, Sisera, who's leader of the Canaanites, he has 900 chariots, which would be seen as like the most premier war technology of the day. So much so that they were so powerful and big that they had oppressed Israel for 20 years. And Israel felt stuck as kind of this powerless little tribe. At the time, Deborah, the prophetess, wife of Lipidah, served as judge over Israel. She used to sit beneath the palm tree of Deborah, situated in the hill country of Ephraim between Ramah and Bethel, and the people would go up to her there to settle disputes. So people from all over Israel would go to this tree where Deborah was, and Deborah would settle their disputes and offer her wisdom and help. In this moment, Deborah urgently sent Barak, the son of Ebed-Noam, out to Kedesh of Naphtali. And this is the news she had for Barak. She said, "The eternal God of Israel commands you, go and get into position near Mount Tabor. Take 10,000 soldiers from the tribes of Naphtali and Nebulun. I will draw out Sisera, Jabin's general, to meet you at the Wadi Kishon, and his chariots and his army, and I will deliver him to you." So she's basically telling Barak to go fight this powerful army, this army that they've never thought they stood a chance against. Although they have 900 chariots and this powerful leader, Sisera, she's saying, go fight them. We're going to deliver them. And Barak says this. This is his response. "I will do this if you go with me. But if you won't, then I won't go either." Now, a lot of times in sermons, this is a point in the story where people call Barak a coward. They say, look it, he needs a girl to go with him. He's too afraid. He won't even go without Deborah. But I don't read this story that way. I think that Deborah was a really fearless, sturdy, trusting leader. And I think Barak knew that the mission would be better if Deborah joined him. And Deborah's response kind of matches that second interpretation. She says, "I will certainly go with you. But you should know that from the beginning that this battle will not lead to your personal glory. The Eternal has decreed that the mighty Sisera will be defeated by a woman." Now, we're in a series studying biblical leaders in the Bible, more specifically women. And in this moment, Deborah's saying, a woman is going to get the credit for taking down this leader, Sisera. Then Deborah got up and accompanied Barak to Kedesh. So what happens in the next couple paragraphs of this story that I'm going to summarize for you is Deborah goes with Barak up to the mountain of Tabor and up to Mountain Tabor. And chariots don't do very well in mountainous territory. So this was a good strategy. And Deborah is really following not just her own wisdom, but the instruction from God, because she is a prophetess. And God tells Deborah that he is going to confuse this army. And amidst the confusion, they are going to win this battle against Sisera and the Canaanites and the 900 chariots. And so the chariots don't do well in mountainous territory. But what we also know from Judges 5, the next chapter, is that God sent a rainstorm. And chariots also don't do well in mud. If you think about a heavy iron chariot trying to get through mud. I have a toddler and we read The Little Blue Truck every night. And there's this line, the little blue truck gets stuck in the muck, in the mire. That's what happened to the chariots. They got stuck in the muck, in the mire, and there was chaos. And what ended up happening is exactly what Deborah prophesied. They took down the entire army. But one leader got away. And of course, that was Sisera. And at this point in the story, I think you can contrast Sisera to Deborah. Because when Deborah is called to join the army, she says a resounding yes. But Sisera somehow weaseled his way out of the chaos and violence and escaped his people as the only survivor. And he stumbled across a tent while he was leaving his troops that had all deceased. And the tent was owned by a couple. And the woman that met Sisera in the tent, her name was Jael, or some people know her as Jael. Either way, it's the same biblical character, Jael or Yael. We're going to call her Jael today. And Jael's husband was an ally with Sisera's tribe. So Sisera thought he was in good company. He thought, oh, this is a safe tent. They're going to host me and be hospitable. And that's where we pick up in this story, where this woman, Jael, went out to meet Sisera from the tent. She said, "Come in, my lord. Come in with me. There is nothing to be afraid of here." So he came inside the tent with her, and she covered him with a rug, just in case some of Barak's soldiers came looking for him. Sisera said, "May I have a little water to drink?" He was very thirsty, so she opened a skin filled with milk and gave him a little, and then covered him again. Sisera said, "Stand and wait at the opening to the tent. If anybody comes and asks you if anyone is inside, tell them no." Sisera fell into a deep sleep, for he was weary, and Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg in one hand and a hammer in the other. She crept softly to his side. Then she drove the peg into his temple, down into the ground, and killed him. When Barak came looking for Sisera, Jael came out to meet him. Jael is kind of a savage. She said, "Come inside. I will show you the man you seek." Right? She's about to show Barak this murder scene. Come inside just seems kind of mild. She says, so he went into the tent with her, and there lay Sisera dead, with a tent peg driven through his head. So Jael felt like this comfortable, hospitable host. Instead of giving him water, she gave him some comforting milk, almost like you would give a baby before bedtime. And sure enough, Sisera falls asleep, feeling safe. And the moment he feels safe and sound asleep, Jael takes a hammer and a tent peg and drives it through his temple and kills the leader, Sisera. Now remember, Deborah said that a woman would get credit for the taking down of Sisera. And so she was right about that. Who ends up getting credit for ending this war is Jael. A couple biblical facts or things to think about in this story. One, many scholars have compared this story to David and Goliath. There's some symbolism there. It's like the underdog taking down the leader or the big, strong person by puncturing their temple or hitting them in the temple. Some other more scholarly approaches, I guess, to this story. Some scholars have said that in the Song of Deborah in the next chapter, a bloody Sisera falls between her legs as she nails him in the temple. And that's supposed to be symbolic of giving birth to a new Israel. Because after this war and battle had been won, Israel had 40 years of peace. So some say that was kind of symbolic of a rebirth of Israel. And lastly, one thing I think is important to this, an important detail for this story is in Judges 5, the next chapter, in the Song of Deborah, there's this moment where Sisera's mother is waiting for his return. And you kind of have some sympathy at first, right? A mother and his son has just been murdered. She has no idea. And she suspects that Sisera is not returning yet because he's dividing the spoil, including a girl for every man in their victory dance after winning the war. So Sisera's mom thinks that surely Sisera and his troops won. They are now taking all the women and dividing them among each other and likely sexually assaulting them is what that would mean. And so if that was the kind of leader that Sisera was, you can understand why Jael might be kind of angry towards a man like this. It gives some context to the story. And ultimately, I believe that this story is not about violence. It's ultimately about peace. Because it took this battle to usher in 40 years of peace for Israel. And so there's a lot we can take from this story. It's a really dense, biblical, Old Testament story about war, and it's bloody, and it's gory, and it's confusing. But I think a lot actually applies to today. And one of those things I think that we can learn from Deborah is that good leaders build trust with others. You know, Deborah had a crazy request, and that was go fight this army that is on paper impossible to beat. And in order for you to develop the kind of team and soldiers that would actually adhere to a command like that, my guess is that they'd have to trust you first. And so I think Deborah had a track record of doing what she said she was going to do. And she was a good judge and leader and prophet, and because she had already built trust with so many people by doing what she says, they believed her even when she requested what seemed like the impossible, defeating Sisera and his army. I'll never forget, in third grade, I ran for student council. I did find one picture. It took a long time to find this picture. That is me in the Adidas jumpsuit. You're welcome. My campaign manager behind me, her name is Amy Hacker. That sign says Ericka, and there are basketballs and footballs on the poster. I don't know why. My slogan was "Just do it, vote Engen," which was my last name. I did steal that from Nike, and they never sued me. And during my campaign speech, I made a promise. I said, if you elect me as part of your student council, I am going to try my best to have a school-wide silly string day at recess, where everybody can bring a can of silly string, and we can have a giant silly string fight. And after I made this announcement, I took my can of silly string and I sprayed the audience, and everybody cheered. I actually brought silly string to do that today, but I decided it was a little much. And you might not react the same. But I got elected, perhaps on that promise. I mean, I don't know. It was kind of memorable. That might be why I got elected. I don't know. And when I went to the principal to get the silly string fight approved, it was an absolutely not. And I thought, no, I promised the whole class. That was like my whole shtick. I ran on silly string. Now you're saying this is not approved? And I learned a hard lesson that year, and that's that you got to do what you say you're going to do, not just as a leader, but in life. And that includes not making false promises. And perhaps I should have gotten my silly string day pre-approved before I announced it as part of my campaign. Good leaders, they do what they say, and that's why people trust them. The second thing I think we can take from the story is that leadership is not the same as authority. I took this class from my friend Judy Lee at Rice University, and it's called The Art and Practice of Influencing Without Authority. And it was in that class that I realized that I often mistake the word leadership as authority. But in this class, leadership was redefined as not a title or position you hold, but as something you exert and do. Leadership is not a person, it's something that everybody has access to on different levels. Judy defines leadership in her adaptive leadership framework as mobilizing people to do difficult work or face a difficult reality to create positive change. And when I think of this story, Deborah is an obvious leader. She mobilizes people to do difficult work and create positive change. The positive change being the years of peace Israel had. But who else is a leader in this story? It's Jael. Now, Jael doesn't have the title that Deborah has. She doesn't have the prestige, the trust, the clout, the fame. Jael lives in a tent. My guess is that her life is pretty isolated. And this is what I love about this story, is that Jael, she really needed one set of skills to be the hero of this story. She needed to know how to pitch a tent, how to use a hammer and a peg. And that's exactly what she knew how to do. And I believe that's how God often works. It's not what title you have at your company or how high your ranks are or what your sphere of influence is. It's what skills do you have to offer today to collaborate with God on something so much bigger than you can imagine. Leadership is not just authority, although we want good leaders in authority. That's why it's important we elect good, sturdy, strong people. But leadership is also an action that we can take. And Jael is a leader in this story just as much as Deborah. And when I look back on the past decade, little over a decade that we've been in Houston, we moved here in 2010. And when I first moved to Houston, I started a master's program at Rice, and I was about to graduate, and I was in my early 20s, and I was really lost at the time, personally. I was struggling with an addiction to a prescription medication, which I've talked about in sermons before. And I had a friend from my old University of Wisconsin, move to Houston. Her name is Chris Spencer. She actually goes to this church. And she moved to Houston for grad school. And one day she called me up and she invited me to play pickup basketball downtown at the Fondy Rec Center, which is on Sabine Street downtown, not too far from here. And Chris and I had played basketball together in college. Chris was and is a lot better player than I am. She went on to play professionally overseas. And I didn't even have basketball shoes in Houston, but I said yes. I said, yes, I'll meet you at Fondy Rec Center. So I walked into this rec center downtown, and it was during the NBA lockout. And the D League, which means like almost NBA players, were scrimmaging at this open scrimmage on a Saturday morning. And I walked into the gym, and they were alley-oop dunking on each other. And I thought, Chris, if I play in this game, I honestly think I'll die. I'm not here to play NBA basketball, okay? I have track shorts and running shoes on. And Chris and I found these 3 other guys that were there, and they, no offense to them, they just didn't give off NBA player vibes. And we asked them, we said, do you want to do a 3-on-3 scrimmage over on the side court here? Because that game looks really scary. And they said yes. And we scrimmaged them, and I got to know 2 of the guys, Andrew and Greg. And they happened to teach high school at a high school here in Houston. And I was telling them, I'm about to graduate. I don't know what I want to do with my life. And they said, you should teach at our high school. I said, no, to be honest, I'm not competent enough to teach a high school level course. The only high school course I think I could maybe teach would be writing, but not even English. Like, I don't want to do all the literature stuff. I could maybe teach writing. Well, there was one course open, one position open at the school that year, and it was an English composition class. And for the first time ever, this school was offering a writing-only English class. And I applied for that job. I got it. I went to Chicago to do the summer teacher training, and that job changed the trajectory of my whole career up until this point. In fact, it was part of what inspired my husband and I's nonprofit called Project 88, where y'all helped us raise almost $2 million in the next 7 years after starting it. But it all started, technically, when I was in a basketball gym with NBA players thinking, why the heck am I here? And I think that's how the stories of God often work. My guess is that Jael wasn't really fulfilled in loving her life, living in a tent, not having skills and education and resources. And I bet there were moments she thought, why am I here? And here we are, thousands of years later, talking about what a hero she was in this story. God often meets us not when everything's going right, but when we feel lost. We know that from the story of the lost son and the parable of the lost sheep, that God meets us when we are lost, even more so than when we are found. And finally, the last point in this sermon is that Deborah modeled collaboration in leadership. I think this is probably the most important point. Because not only did she say yes to Barak and yes to God, but she was all for giving all the credit to Jael. Here, Deborah had been in the battle zone, given all the commands, been a faithful, trusted servant of God, and she was signing up to give all the credit to Jael for taking out Sisera. And we live in a culture, Ecclesia, where women are often pitted against each other. Are you team Meghan Markle or are you team Kate Middleton? Are you team Hailey Bieber or Selena Gomez? When I was younger, there was a show called Laguna Beach, and you were either team LC or team Kristen. Our media culture does this all the time. We pit women against each other. And in this story, we're not arguing if Deborah or Jael are better. We're saying it took both of them to glorify God and bring peace to Israel. And I think that's at the heart of this story, is that this story is about women empowering other women and collaborating on a journey that is not their own, but that is God's. And when we read the New Testament as Christians, we also have a different, distinct calling in leadership. And that is that everyone in this room believes that to be a good leader, you have to first be a good follower of Him. And that's what unites us in this great mission that we call the Christian church today. Ecclesia, let me pray with you. Dear God, thank you for your guidance in these women's lives. Thank you for this scripture that reminds us that collaboration is the way of Christ. It's the way of you. That if we want to fulfill the kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven, it doesn't take competition, but it takes a unitive collaboration. In your mission and name we pray. Amen.